the year 1324, gold began falling from the sky. Not literally, but for the people of Cairo it might as well have. Prices collapsed, markets panicked, merchants celebrated, then suffered. An entire economy shifted, not because of war, not because of plague, but because of one traveler, a king crossing the desert, a man so wealthy that historians still struggle to measure his fortune today. And yet, outside parts of Africa, most people have never heard his name. This is the story of the richest man in history, and the global economy he changed by accident. How can one journey destabilize an international financial system? History teaches us that empires rise through conquest, innovation, or discovery, but rarely through generosity. So how did a religious pilgrimage, an act meant to demonstrate humility, reshape trade across continents? And why did medieval economists record economic shockwaves spreading years after one man passed through their cities? To answer that question, we must rethink what the medieval world looked like, because the center of global wealth was not where most people imagine. What if the economic heart of the 14th century world was in Africa? Early 14th century, Europe struggled through famine and political instability. Kings borrowed heavily, gold was scarce. In Asia, the Mongol Empire connected trade routes from China to the Mediterranean. Across North Africa and the Middle East, cities like Cairo served as financial capitals linking continents. And beneath the Sahara Desert lay the engine powering them all: gold. Not small quantities, but vast reserves. At the time, nearly half of the world's known gold originated from West Africa. Gold fueled currencies, gold financed empires, gold defined global power. And one ruler controlled access to much of it. Who controlled the resource the entire medieval world depended on? His name was Mansa Musa, Emperor of Mali, a realm stretching across thousands of kilometers, larger than many European kingdoms combined. Caravans crossed his lands carrying salt north and gold south. Scholars gathered in cities like Timbuktu. Trade taxes filled royal treasuries. But Musa was not preparing for conquest. He was preparing for a pilgrimage. A sacred journey to Mecca required of every capable Muslim. For most believers it was difficult. For Musa, it became legendary. He did not travel alone. He traveled with an empire. What happens when unimaginable wealth goes on tour? Historical accounts describe a caravan almost impossible to visualize. Thousands of attendants, officials, soldiers, servants, and camels. Dozens, possibly hundreds, each carrying sacks of gold. As the procession crossed the Sahara, word spread ahead like rumor becoming myth. Cities prepared. Crowds gathered. When Musa reached Cairo, witnesses recorded scenes rarely seen in economic history. He gave gold freely, to the poor, to scholars, to merchants, to officials, gifts, donations, purchases made at extravagant prices. Generosity became spectacle. At first the city celebrated. Gold flowed everywhere. But markets obey rules even kings cannot command. What happens when too much wealth enters one place at once? Gold lost value. Slowly at first, then dramatically. Prices rose unpredictably. Currency destabilized. Merchants who depended on stable exchange rates began losing money. Chroniclers later wrote that Cairo's economy took years to even decades to recover. Musa had not destroyed wealth. He had changed its meaning. By introducing massive amounts of gold into circulation, he unintentionally triggered inflation. Centuries before modern economic theory, a medieval pilgrimage demonstrated a timeless financial truth. Value depends on scarcity. How far did the effects of this journey travel? News of Musa spread beyond Egypt. European mapmakers began redrawing Africa. On Catalan maps, a crowned African king appeared holding a golden orb, a symbol of unimaginable wealth. Traders sought new routes south. Scholars traveled toward Mali's learning centers. Timbuktu emerged as one of the intellectual capitals of the medieval world. Libraries grew, universities flourished, ideas moved alongside gold. Africa was no longer a distant mystery, but a recognized pillar of global commerce. Musa's journey had done something extraordinary. Without conquest, he changed how the world saw an entire continent. Was wealth his greatest legacy or knowledge? Today, central banks carefully control money supply to avoid inflation. Economists model markets using principles Musa unknowingly demonstrated 7 centuries ago. Global economies remain interconnected, vulnerable to sudden shifts in resources and perception. A decision made in one region can ripple worldwide, just as it did in 1324. Mansa Musa's story reminds us that globalization did not begin with modern technology. It began with trade routes, shared currencies, and human ambition crossing deserts long before airplanes crossed oceans. History often remembers conquerors, men who built empires through war, but sometimes history turns because of movement, not violence, a journey, an act of faith. A king seeking spiritual fulfillment unknowingly reshaped economies and rewrote global perception. Somewhere between generosity and power lies a paradox. The richest man in history is remembered not for what he kept, but for what he gave away. And perhaps the greatest lesson of his story is this: the forces that shape the world are not always intentional. Sometimes history changes simply because one person moves through it, carrying more influence than anyone realizes.